both grant covered. The other ones we have are some legal services for Flegel, and then a conference expenditure for a luncheon. So I can stand for any questions.
Bills?
Was there a question, Joe?
Yeah, I'll second it. And then in terms of discussion, when are we going to stop calling it Hudson Manufacturing and start referring to it as Confluence? If necessary, I would submit an amendment to the motion that from henceforth we refer to the property as Confluence. If anybody wants to second that.
I would accept that. Yes.
All right. Well, I will make sure to do that in my determination of bills here in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, a couple of years ago when everything was approved for Mr. Reagan's group, I suggested to Hastings Family Service that every time somebody referred to that property as Hudson, that they had to pay $1 to Hastings Family Service, and they were very happy to hear that. But I haven't collected anything yet from anybody. So beware, I'm going to be on the prowl now.
All right, well, we have a motion and a second with the added request to edit future bills appropriately with the new developer's Confluence name. So barring any other discussion, we can, all those in favor with an aye?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Bills are approved. Welcome, Jen.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President and HEDRA Commissioners. The first item we have before us tonight is to award a bid and authorize signature of a contract for wood sealing and encapsulation at the Hudson manufacturing site, which is now known as the Confluence. So this is part of our city and HEDRA obligations for environmental remediation. As you may recall, during the purchase and development agreement, we had agreed to do certain environmental remediation after transfer of the property. This included the vapor intrusion mitigation system, which is mostly installed at this point, and now the encapsulation cleaning project. What this is, it basically involves scraping by hand and vacuuming old paint and materials from the ceilings and floor joists from the building. They have been determined to have PAHs and other contaminants that are in there. And then following that, to put an epoxy sealant, more like a paint on top of that, to make sure that any residual contaminants are sealed in. This is something that was approved by MPCA as a work plan to move forward with. As we went about this, we went out and had a bid earlier this year, this fall, and a part of the bid, we had a mandatory on-site visit for people that would be eligible to bid on the project. In preparation for that, while the bid was out there, we contacted probably about 10 or 12 different environmental remediation firms just to let them know, hey, this is a project that we have going on. We've got a pre-bid meeting scheduled here. We'd love to see you there. Unfortunately, despite those contacts and despite publications we did through Quest CDN, which is a contract site used by a lot of professionals in the industry, and through our own website, we only received one bidder, Mavo Systems. The good news about Mavo Systems is they're a very talented and firm that's done this type of work before. We had used them previously in the Hudson building for asbestos abatement, and it was one of those contracts that we encountered that it went smoothly. There weren't any overruns. It was what it was, so that was good. But unfortunately, it's one bidder that we have. You may recall that in October, we also approved a contract with Mavo so they could do some testing on the site. One of the things that they noted to us was they were unsure as to which cleaning method may work best to satisfy the results of MPCA. And so what they wanted to do is to establish a few different test areas within the building and use different methods to clean it, document how long it took, the cost of it, and the effectiveness of it. So that was conducted. The sealant was put on, and then there's, after a 30-day period, samples of those were sent to a lab for testing. Unfortunately, we expected to have the results back from lab testing prior to the meeting tonight. We do not have those. So what we're asking to do is to give a conditional approval based upon the receipt of those lab results being back. From looking at the sealant application down there by the professionals, they noted, and I noted as well, to what extent that's worth, that the encapsulant on all 3 test areas using different methods seem very similar. So the expectation is that all of these will work. They all seem to seal similarly, and so that we could move forward with the application that is being presented tonight, which is the bid for Mayville. If this changes for some reason, we will need to bring this back to HEDRA. If the lab does come back and say, this method does not work, or none of the methods work, heaven forbid, we would have to bring that back. I don't expect that to occur based upon our conversations with the professionals, and I do expect very shortly that we will have those lab results back. So that is a condition that we're adding to the contract tonight itself. So what are we looking at here? Unfortunately, something that's much more expensive than we anticipated. We had an estimate of this project about 2 or 3 years ago of about $215,000. That's adjusted to today's dollars and increases that we've seen. The Mayville Systems bid came back at just under $400,000. I will note in the red there that this number is slightly smaller than what is presented within your reports itself. When we went through an on-site inspection with Mayville earlier this week, we noted an area that does not need to be treated because Confluence will be demolishing it, so we don't need to seal it. So there was a deduction back from, I think, the $406,000 within your bid. So a little bit less expensive, but still expensive. So how do we pay for this? We have sources available through grants of about $153,000 through an existing Met Council grant and some savings we've had with our RIG grant for vapor intrusion systems. So we have that on hand to spend, and there's also HEDRA funding that would need to go into this. Previously, we allocated about $73,000 that would go back in. What would be new on here would be the remainder, which is about $173,000. With that $173,000, we had allocated about $200,000 towards Block 1 cleanup. That's the Panache site north of Art Space. We did that in case that we did not receive the grant for cleanup of the property. We got the grant for that property for $270,000, so we do not need the full extent of those funds for the property. So essentially what we're doing is transferring funds set aside for environmental cleanup from one property downtown to another property downtown. And so that's where the funds would come. They would come out of the fund balance itself because it's part of our capital improvement plan to utilize those funds, but those are funds that were targeted for expenditure. And so that's what we're proposing tonight for how we would pay for this. When we looked at this, you know, it's significantly higher than the bid estimates for the project. We had Stantec, our development consultant, look at this hard to make sure that this was a bid that they thought was fair and one that was rational. Came back that it was. The purchase and development agreement requires us to perform the wood sealing and encapsulation in a timely manner. Fortunately and unfortunately, the project's moving forward great. We need to be able to do this so the project continues to move forward. So our ability to pause at this point and say, guys, we have to find another way to do this has serious implications on the construction schedule for the Confluence building. So we are able to find additional funding that we set aside for environmental cleanup, which is good. Again, the project cost is not ideal, but it is necessary to continue with the development of the project. So what I'm asking for tonight is to recommend or to award the encapsulation project bid to Mayville Systems in the amount of $398,500, and also an authorized signature of the contract when that comes forward. Approval is subject to final lab analysis of the proposed cleaning methods to ensure that will pass MPCA qualification. So I can stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. John, what does it get tested with the final lab? What if this product, are we going to do it first before Confluence starts to do they're working there, and what if it's damaged? Is there any more cost coming
Sure.
our way?
Good question on that. Originally, within the contract, we had set aside about 10% of the project cost for touch-ups to come back from the encapsulant. When we had a meeting on site with Confluence and the contractors earlier this week. We thought it would be best we still have that provision in there, but what we're going to do is delay the application of the encapsulant to the end of the project, so they can put in hang all their things, piping and other things from the ceiling, and then put the encapsulant over that. So we won't have these situations where you've got penetrations occurring, which may negate the encapsulate.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions, discussion?
So the HEDRA amount is 72,460, right? That's what HEDRA is putting in. Okay.
Part of what HEDRA's putting in, yes.
Yeah. What does that do to our HEDRA budget?
Fund balance we have right now is about $1.3 million, I think, altogether. So it'll still be over $1 million after this.
Okay. And that's through the 31st of December? Or,
Oh, you mean the
yeah.
grant requirement?
No. Our budget
Oh.
for HEDRA is through the 31st of this month?
Our budget would be through there, correct.
Okay, and then we'll have more money after the 1st of January then?
New budget after January, correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Barring any other questions or discussion, I think this is open for a motion to approve or reject.
I make a motion then that we approve staff to move forward with the plan that was presented to us at the grant roll of the $398,500.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries then. Reward that one, John.
Okay, thank you.
Second order of business, Rusty, you're gonna take us through TIF reimbursement for remediation costs.
Ties closely to the conversation that we just had for the project formerly known as Hudson Sprayer. I like that. It's that Prince theory. We have the ability under the state law governing tax increment financing to reimburse these costs through tax increment district number 7 that covers that property. To do that, you need to create an obligation that becomes the conduit to take that tax increment back into HEDRA funds, and that's done through an interfund loan. All we're doing tonight is creating the ability to use tax increment in the future if that money is available. And I think there's a real question as to whether or not that tax increment is actually going to be available. The payment of the bonds and then the subsequent reimbursement of the city for the tax levy that it's put into it probably will consume most of that tax increment, but we at least have bookmarked our ability to reimburse what we're recommending, $250,000 of the cost that John just described from future tax increment. And it seems like a prudent thing to do. So to do that, you would adopt the resolution that's in your packet, including the amount of $250,000, which was a blank in the version that went out in your packet.
Rusty, could you walk us through a hypothetical scenario where what sounds like an unlikely scenario would be, might actually occur? I mean, just in terms of overall flow of finances and.
I will do my best. I can't remember the dates exactly, but the tax increment financing district runs till 2043 in that neighborhood. The tax increment will be used when it's finally generated to pay debt service on the bonds that were issued in 2016 to pay the HEDRA bonds back. right now we're levying taxes to pay debt service on those bonds because there's no tax increment. The tax increment will then go to pay debt service, and those bonds are paid off, if I recall correctly, February 1 of 2029. So the period between 2029 and 2043, you're collecting tax increment, and there's an existing interfund loan that allows that tax increment to go back to the city to reimburse for those tax increments that were used to pay the bonds. A future city council in HEDRA could decide that it was important to channel some of that money back into the HEDRA budget to reimburse for these costs. It really is a function of how much money is there in tax increment in the time and the total amount of tax reimbursement that is eligible to be made. And we simply just don't know. It's very difficult to say how much value is going to exist in that tax increment financing district 10 years into the future.
Is it somewhat predicated on additional projects coming to fruition somewhere in the district?
I think it would be more predicated on the taxable value of the building once it's added to the Dakota County tax level. And if it's higher than we've projected it to be, there will be more tax increment coming in. If it's lower, there would be less. And that will change the numbers that Rusty has provided us with.
That's absolutely true. The other part of that, Mr. Chair, is also true, is that that district would capture any other new construction on that site that happened to occur. So if the project is successful, not only will the value of that property be higher, but the chance that it has additional expansion and adds value, that value will increase the tax increment as well.
Rusty, but we're not extending the date of how long the district would stay under a TIF, correct?
This has no impact whatsoever on the tax increment financing district itself. This is simply creating an option to be exercised in the future to reimburse some of these costs at the discretion of the people that are making the decisions at the time.
Okay.
Just a kind of a clerical question. You said this would be tax increment financing District 7. How many TIF districts do we have that are active right now?
There are 3 active tax increment districts right now. This is actually called Hudson Sprayer, so it's TIF District number 7. Guardian Angels is TIF District number 3, and Napa is TIF District number 5.
Okay, and for the public's sake, I'm bringing this up so that they don't think that we currently have 7 districts going. We only have 3 going. Then.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right, well, barring any other questions or discussion, I believe we have on the table a resolution to adopt this this agreement or this memorandum, yeah.
Mr. Chair, I'd make the motion that we accept the resolution 2019-6, a resolution creating a loan that could be paid back if tax increment financing for District 7 is available in the future.
I'll second that.
A motion and a second. All those in favor with an aye? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries then. Rusty, you're going to stay at the mic there and take us through strategic plan discussion?
I have the next 2 items, so I'll do this one. Last meeting, we discussed focus issues for 2020 and an extension of the strategic plan of giving us some guidance as to things that were important to work on in the coming year. We had some discussion at the November meeting, and the task before you was to come back at this meeting and give us your feedback. Is there something missing? Any changes that you would propose in these issues? And also, are there some that are more important than others as we try to ration how we use our time and focus on things that are important to the community, are there things on that list that we should give more attention to in your mind? So just to refresh your memory, this is the list that was presented. Some of the things we're simply going to do. Other things in there are things that we aspire to do, and it really depends on everything else that's going on. And I'd be happy to go through the list again if that would be helpful. Otherwise, I will stand for any questions, comments, feedback you'd care to provide.
So Rusty, are you asking us to prioritize whether it's column 1 housing, column 3 redevelopment is 1 and 2, and then are you asking specifics out of those, or just as categories? What do we see the highest need?
Commissioner, I will take any feedback that you want to give me. I think what would be the most helpful is issue-specific things. Are there specific tasks that we want to focus our attention on sooner rather than later as the year starts to wind through?
Go ahead, Ron.
Well, I actually marked them, so it's my last meeting. I would say that your first item there, the development and implementation of strategies for housing, I would place as the #1 priority for this upcoming year. The second one, in my mind, is the redevelopment and looking up and down, how do you say it? Looking up and not only downtown, but up and down Vermilion Street. That is the second highest priority in my mind. Business environment, it's so hard to change the business environment because we don't run the businesses. And we can try to get out of their way and try to make it easier for them. But to change your business environment, it's harder to do. And then I thank you, Rusty, for the strategic planning. Though it's #4 on my list, planning each year like this, I think is very beneficial. Thank you.
Just a general question. This won't constitute a recommendation necessarily, but we got a presentation with an arts and culture study that's going on that certainly talked extensively about the nature of an understanding of the arts and culture of a community and what that lends to economic development. And I'm just curious if that's landed anywhere within the context of this broader discussion of strategic planning, or if that's something that's kind of happening independent of this, or if that's been given any thought or inclusion. Rusty, just curious.
I have certainly given that some thought. I'm a believer that for this community in particular, there are economic development implications of arts and culture. It's something that is part of the fabric of this community, and I think is an asset as we look to try and grow business and attract visitors. But I would suggest that it is an issue that we will deal with in greater detail as we look to update the strategic plan later this year. That way we'll get the results of the planning process and be able to use that as input to looking for goals going into to 2021 and beyond. I don't know enough now, other than I know what's going on, and I think it's important, and I think it's relevant to what we're going to do. But I think we'll be better informed by when their planning process is concluded, and we can see how do we fit into where they see opportunities and needs for the body public to act to try and capitalize on the assets we have in the community. So hold on to those thoughts for about 6 months.
Okay. don't think this requires a formal action, it's more just a general feedback and concurrence on some priorities.
Well, I'll just add to what was said about the housing. I feel that that's really where we should start. That should be number one. So I'm in full agreement with Ron. My wife and I just purchased a townhome. They're few and far between for sale. And all of our friends who are about same age as what we are, were all saying, how did you do it? And I said, well, we just drove around and, wrote down addresses, and we just happened to luck out with the one that we, got, and we grabbed it. I mean, if there was more available out there, we probably would have taken our time, but what I'm getting is feedback that's saying, tell us how it's going, selling your house, buying the townhome, all of those things, because we're going to be doing the same thing in the next, 2 to 5 years or so. From my standpoint, I was looking for something in Ward 2 because I do represent the city council in Ward 2. And so, again, we lucked out, saw this one, grabbed it as soon as we could. But there's not an awful lot out there for other people to be, looking at. In terms of the housing, and not just the townhomes, housing in general, whether it's multifamily, single family, whatever, because as a professional educator, and so is my wife, for our careers, housing and education go hand in hand. And what I see going on with the school district with declining enrollment does frustrate me in terms of what the future is for who is going to live here, who's going to be educated here, and get their degrees and start their businesses and so forth. And so I see education and housing going really hand in hand there. We can't do anything about the education standpoint in terms of what the schools can do, other than indirectly, helping them lead the charge. But to me, the housing is really important right now. The businesses will, I think, come as we see the housing increase, as far as that goes. So that's my feedback.
Well, I appreciate that feedback. It's very supportive of where John and I want to go with this. I think that if we were looking at the HEDRA calendar, this would be the year of house. It is at the top of my list of things that are important to the community for all the reasons that you said. And we're going to dive into the deep end of the housing pool as soon as the county's needs assessment report gets done. And that has too much important information in it to guide our understanding of what issues and opportunities are in the community. But this organization is particularly well suited to deal with those issues in depth that no one else is going to deal with, and we will be having that extensively on the agenda as soon as we're ready to do that, because there are an abundance of housing issues to consider. I will tell you though, and I think John would echo this, is I am heartened by the interest that we're starting to see in new housing development. I think we have finally started to turn that corner long after the Great Recession, though it may be, to start seeing a build-up of a variety of housing options here in Hastings. And we've got some work to do to sustain that growth, but it certainly looks better to me than it did when I started in April.
Well, to comment along with that, at the council meeting the other night, we had the first hearing on the budget for next year. Our tax rate has been going down. And I humorously said at the council meeting that that it was kind of coincidental, or maybe more than coincidental, that the tax rate has been going down since I got on the council. I don't lay claim to that, 100%. There were many other factors that entered into that. But our tax rate, what is it, 57? Yeah, it went down to 57%, which is great. But in comparison to other communities, you take, for example, a city like Egan, their tax rate is 38%. Whoa, what a huge difference. And if we had a 38% tax rate, wow, what that would be doing to people's property taxes here in Hastings as far as that goes. And it's all about the housing. It's all about new businesses coming in. It's all about business expansion coming in and so forth. Tie in the Vermilion Corridor study, what we want to see. We want to see some 2-story, 3-story buildings going up along Vermilion Street because we're terribly behind in terms of what our tax potential is along Vermilion Street. 1 story, that's what we're taxing at. If we had multi-story parcels there, our tax rate would go down even more and faster as far as that goes. You mentioned the recession. I still to this day cannot figure out why we got lost in a cloud of dust as a city when the recession was over and everybody started to grow, all of the cities around us, and we sort of sat there stagnant. Not sort of, we did stagnate for a number of years. So I am excited to hear about what is out there, and I know you've had a lot to do with it. I had been crying, again, I've said this many times, I've been asking for an economic development director ever since I've been on the council. I got on when the recession hit, and we had to cut services, we had to cut employees for the city, but we still got things done. But it wasn't easy, and a lot of the credit goes to the city staff for making sure that we still provided the services needed for the city. And in particular, our 2 former city administrators for, taking us through some very, very hard times budget-wise. So let's hope that, this is from 2008 to 19, we're talking 11 years that we've been, sitting here marking time. And it's got to come. It has to come. And I'm really excited about what the future can do for it. Confluence finishing up is going to be a really diamond projection there for us as opposed to being a diamond in the rough. We're going to get it done. I think that's going to be a real catalyst for what's going to happen in the future. So my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Speak for anyone here, but I think I see nodding heads.
Commissioners, what I'm taking away from this based upon the comments that I heard tonight, I just want to be clear on some of the direction here, is that when we take a look at the priorities that have been proposed up there, that housing is in that #1 position, redevelopment would come after that, business environment, strategic planning, and I think that's the consensus I'm hearing tonight. I'm just confirming that with the rest of the board. Okay, thank you.
We can hear the collective nod.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. All right.
It's hard to put in the minutes, but
It is, bobblehead the minutes. Well, Erica can do it.
Okay. Next order, TIF district for senior housing.
Real Estate Equities is the developer of the proposed affordable senior housing project at Schoolhouse Square. They have submitted an application for tax increment financing assistance for their project, and that should come as no surprise to anybody. They have deposited $15,000 in escrow to pay for professional services related to the creation of the tax increment district and the related development agreement. The action before you this evening is to request that the City Council call for a public hearing that would be held on Tuesday, February 18th, normally on the 17th, but the 17th is President's Day, to consider establishing a tax increment district and making related changes in the redevelopment, the Vermilion Street redevelopment area, and to make the notices of the tax increment district as required by state law. We have engaged Northland Securities, who's the municipal advisor and economic development advisor to the city of Hastings. They are working on the tax increment plan now. A draft plan pursuant to county policy and state law will go to the county and the school district in early January. It will come before you in February on the 13th. It will go before the city council, or before the planning commission on the 10th, and then to the city council for a public hearing on the 18th of February. It gives us plenty of time to get it together and to explain to all of you who have, not all of you have gone through the tax increment financing process, what we're doing and what it means, and to get your input into it. But tonight really starts that ball rolling. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about this action or about the process in general.
Rusty, I'm going to trouble you for a re-education on TIF districting, at least to the extent that I just want to understand. This is the first time I've sat and considered a proposition to add one. So I'd ask the question of, one, is a project like this contingent upon a TIF district? As in, this is the only way that it's economically feasible for a project like this to move forward. And two would be if it's not necessarily the case, is there any downside ever to the city of Hastings to add a TIF district versus whatever the alternative would be to just complete a project and hit the tax rolls and basically do it without a TIF district? I'm just, is there give and take here, or is there no reason to not approve a TIF district? Or can you walk us through a couple? I'm just full of hypotheticals tonight that I want to throw at you.
I'd be happy to try and tackle those questions. They're all kind of interrelated. I would never tell you that there is anything that is absolute or consistent with tax increment financing. Each project has to stand on its own merits, and it is the job of the developer to demonstrate the need for tax increment, and it's the job of staff and our consultants to ratify that and to explain it to you and to make sure that the tax increment assistance that's requested and then ultimately given is the appropriate amount. You may have heard, in conjunction with using tax increment financing, the but-for test, and that's a good thing to remember. And basically that means that but for the use of tax increment financing, the project as proposed would not occur. That doesn't mean no development would occur, but it means the project that's been proposed would not occur. And as I've told you in the past, and will tell you, I think at every opportunity, if you don't think that there is a public purpose, if there is public benefit out of your participation in a project using tax increment financing, you should not do it. The reason for using tax increment is to cause development to happen in a way that benefits the community. Affordable housing, in my mind, is the single most clear-cut use of tax increment financing. In all the projects that I've worked on, you cannot provide affordable housing without that tax increment assistance that helps keep those rents affordable. And the developers have provided, and we'll provide that information to you, operating projections that show how that works. to answer the first part of your question, I am absolutely confident that this project will not proceed without tax increment financing assistance from the city. Now, the amount of that assistance is certainly negotiable. You know, how much and for how long, all of that is negotiable in every single project, and that's part of the give and take that goes on behind the scenes that ultimately will come to you with an explanation and certainly subject to your review and approval. But if you step back and think about it, constructing nice, affordable housing doesn't vary substantially from constructing nice market rate housing. The difference is the rents that you can collect support a different level of project expense. And so to get affordable, sustainable senior housing, you need a tax increment financing district. And one of the things that the TIF district does from a policy perspective is allow you to ensure that it stays affordable housing. The tax increment assistance is not a long-term guarantee. It is a year-to-year commitment that if you meet that criteria for providing affordable housing, we will convey the tax increment if and when we collect it. But if you stop doing that, your ability to collect the tax increment goes away. So it's really a way for a community to make sure that a project that starts as affordable stays as affordable. And the greater challenge I have found is that when that tax increment district ends and you no longer have that financial assistance to provide, how can you help that project continue to provide affordable senior housing?
Thank you. That was helpful.
I hope I answered your question.
Very helpful, thank you.
And Rusty knows I'm skeptical on TIF. I'm not a big fan of it because I think what I'm worried about is the services that come with added housing and people. There's still services that we provide as a city that taxpayers will have to pay for. Police, fire, all this stuff adds up with statistics. But for, he's done a very good job educating me on TIF, on the but for and how it gets paid out. And what I like about this, what's in front of us, is just the start of it, because I like how you said that the developer has to pay the money up front to say, go get this project in front of us. We then are going to use and justify that. And I think I'm going to have a lot of questions because be different. One will be, and Rusty knows, I'm going to know how much the land is being sold to this developer. Is it zero, or is the person selling the land get a little bit of money? Then that might determine how much we think is a good TIF number to use. And using the scenario you just showed or shared with us, if they stop it, I think we're going to be writing in there that no, we're going to go back and get some extra money, because I don't want to sign something up for on behalf of the community that's good for 25 years and let them get the ship halfway across the ocean and say, thanks, we're good. I don't think that's right. I want to do the but fors. This is what the community needs, and this is a good way of doing it, because it's providing a gap that we can't fill right now under the current land that we have, the rules that we have. I'm thankful that this developer is willing to come and ask us to look at this, and I think it's a good start. The key word is start, because I like how we got a lot of action items in front of us to help guide us as we go forward. So thank you for doing all the homework. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, and those are all excellent questions, and as I said, if we can't answer them, then we've not done our job, and this will not move forward. And we will do our best to give you more than enough information to say. And this is frankly a good developer to work with on a project like this. They know what they're doing. They understand the questions you're going to ask. They've been very transparent in our dealings with them so far. So this is a great place to start for what will certainly not be the last time that a request for a tax increment district will come before you.
All right, well, we do have an action requested here to formally request that the city council call for a public hearing, if I understand this correctly.
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion to make that request in a second. All those in favor with an aye? Aye. Any opposed? So motion carries to make that request to city council then. John's going to hit us with some reports and updates.
It is. I have one more action item actually
Oh.
added to the agenda. This is the authorization of a budget amendment for this year's budget. We've worked together with Finance Manager Melanie Lammers in presenting this information for you. It represents changes in the revenues and expenditures so that we are consistent in our budget with what we see on the ground here. So what I'm showing you is in your memo itself. I'll run through this a little bit here. So on the left here is our 2019 budget as it sits today, towards the end of 2019, and the change. So I should clarify, this is for this year's budget. This is the 2020 budget that would be starting in January, but the 2019 budget that we're in today. So within the revenue side, we expected $31,000 in repayments to come in from loan. That's always a very difficult figure to try to calculate because people repay loans at different times. Fortunately for us, we've had a lot of repayments this year, so we're up to almost to $100,000 there, which is great. The other thing that we've had is a lot of county grants. It says county here, but this is county grants, state grants, essentially. Most of that for the Confluence development. So about $1.9 million there. So our revenues going up from $31,000 to over $2 million. Great. Fortunately, a lot of those are pass-through costs that we have for environmental remediation and development. As we look at the expenditure side of it, we have grant expenditures of about $2.15 million there. Capital outlay is at $20,000, so that's an addition. So what we have altogether here is a loan revenue change amended of about little over $2 million, $2,029,000. Total expenditures of just shy of $2.2 million. So we have revenues less expenditures amended of $141,000. Part of that is dealing with what we talked about earlier tonight in the additional expenses we have for the Confluence development on the encapsulation project. That incorporates a substantial portion of this figure here. And so the action item that I have before you tonight is to authorize the amendment to the 2019 budget based upon the information you see here within your packet, and I can stand for any questions.
Motion to authorize the budget amendment as presented.
I'd make that motion to authorize the budget amendment.
Motion? Second. Those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries then.
All right, thank you. Well, moving to some updates here. Since we're on the topic of the Confluence tonight, I'll continue on with that one. So what's been going on? This is an interesting picture here now that I look at it because I see bare dirt. So you can tell this one's a little bit older from a couple of weeks now. But park and landscaping improvements, a lot of it did get completed this year. Stormwater discharge pipe that we were having problem with the river level did get installed. Overlook decking, so if you've been down there, that's an item that's still under construction. That's what the picture down here represents. This is going to be a really nice amenity when it's constructed. You'll have railings around there. It'll be lit at night. It'll be a place for outdoor concerts, other exhibits that may be out there. Plus, it has a really interesting effect when you're standing out there. It's so close to the river, yet higher up. It's almost like you're floating on it because you're right around the bend there. You kind of get that effect. So it's going to be a great amenity, and that'll continue on construction right now. That's about the last outdoor item that still continues on right now. Important for us is we do have that $980,000 grant that needs to be expended by the end of the year. They are on track to do that. They've already submitted a pay request for over half of that. That's into Met Council now, and we expect the other half of that to come very shortly. So we're in good shape in expending those funds on site. That does mean that in the spring, Confluence will have some out-of-pocket costs for remaining outdoor items, the sodding, some of the landscaping that was not done this year. As we look on to other things going on, we've talked a lot about the environmental aspects tonight. Wood sealing and encapsulation, as you know, we've taken action, and that'll be starting up. I'm assuming the lab tests come back, which I hope they come back tomorrow. We've got everyone staged up to start there on the 9th, this Monday, with the encapsulation crew. So they'll be doing their scraping starting at that date. On the vapor intrusion mitigation system, that again is the system that actively vents soil vapor from the ground out through an HVAC system. Most of that has been installed. The piping has been installed. As you can see from these individuals here, they took the crawl space area, put the piping in, put sand over the top, and they're spraying this liquid boot applicant, which seals the area, and then there'll be concrete put on top of this shortly after. You can see around here some of the pipes for the network here and other utilities within the ground. So that's been substantially done. Coming up in the next couple weeks, they'll be putting rooftop units on the building and putting in some panels, and then once the three-phase electrical comes into the building early in 2020, they'll be doing their final testing on it. So with that one, we're on track to spend our grant funds as well. So that's what we've got for the Confluence there, if anyone has any questions.
John, I'm assuming that the grant, and I'm asking this because about a half dozen people, primarily business owners downtown, asking what is the projected profit for the contractor on the park and landscaping improvements. Is there anything in the grant that says you can't make more than 5% or 3% or, whatever on that?
Nothing specific to a profit margin on there, no.
So whatever the contractor spends, the contractor gets the balance then afterwards?
What we have on there, the $980,000 is divided into, I think, 10 different subcategories in which there's a specific amount allocated for different items within the project. Some of the engineering, grading, landscaping, sidewalks, different light items there. And so it's very specific that they have to meet those requirements. One of the things that Med Council does have with their grants is, some of the overhead and some other soft expenditures are not grant eligible.
Okay, so the assumption then is that the contractor will make a profit of some sort on this when it's all done with, and that profit will come out of the grant.
I would imagine that any contractor working on a site here is going to set something up for profit on there when they go through a contract. As far as what the extent would be on this project, I'm unsure.
Okay, they don't have to justify that to you then?
What it comes down to is we did some estimates early on in developing the different pots for the grant and what we thought would be the cost for doing certain items there. And so the contractor needs to be within those items. If they're not, then anything in addition to that would be Confluence's obligation to pay.
So it's kind of like one of our public works projects for street rebuilding. We put an RFP out, we get bidders, and okay, they're going to get the job done no matter how they spend it then, right?
A little bit different from the standpoint of a biddings, because these are all private contracts through Confluence on the park grant, I should say. When we're talking about the environmental grants, that's something that we're the ones that are the project managers of it, so that one's a little bit different. So when we look directly at the park and landscaping grant, $980,000 divided into 10 subcategories. Here's how much you could spend on each of them. And then it's Confluence's responsibility to find a contractor that can get the work done for that money.
For that money or less.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And that's the thing, the advantage to Confluence in the circumstances, if they could find someone that could do the project for less, then they could potentially do more things on the project, because right now they're in a situation that the outdoor work is not fully funded by this grant. There's going to be out-of-pocket costs that they're expending.
Right. That kind of happened with the parking ramp as well, the reconstruction of the alley.
Right.
And Confluence ended up, I know they weren't too happy about it, and they ended up spending more than what they thought they were going to on that.
Right.
But there really wasn't anything anybody could do on that. That was the cost of it.
It was and not grant eligible
Yeah.
with the alleyway,
Yeah,
correct?
I mean, the only advantage to them is that they were able to do the work rather than putting it out on bid, right?
I believe their general contractor on site, Stockwood, did the work,
Right.
correct?
Okay, thank you, John.
Okay, I'll move on here back to my chair. Other updates with Panache Cidery, we have received some preliminary plans for them. They're working with the civil, they're working with an architect, good news there. Hopefully they're starting to put together some preliminary numbers. So we have a target for the submittal of their items by the end of this month. And so we hope that they are on target to meet that. And then we will be meeting on that in January as a review of those items. The contract itself, again, would expire at the end of January at this point. So we'll have hopefully more to report on that one towards the end of the month, but I can report that there is some progress being made on a few items that they're doing there. So I'm not sure if there's any other questions on Panache at this point. Moving on from there, excuse me, other development going on our commercial vacancy end of it. We haven't really seen too much changes in the vacancies over the last month. There is a new daycare center opening up in Westview Mall, which is good news. We're looking at plans for a climate control storage facility in the former Sears space near Coburn's. That looks like that's going to be a go. We also received site plans in earlier this week for the construction of the mini storage over in the industrial park that we had the land sale for. So that is something that we'll be going through Planning Commission and Council either December or January as we look at that. Other development updates. This Monday, the Planning Commission will be meeting to review some changes to the city code regarding allowing for additional housing units in larger historic homes. So that'll be something that we hope will add some flexibility to people that have large homes, which will hope to add to the viability of those structures. We also did receive our grant for the downtown properties revitalization study, so thanks for Rusty for putting together the work on that for $15,000. So we're putting our heads together to figure out the best way to move forward with that and start that in earnest coming up in 2020. Looking at other things here, we do have a HEDRA appointment coming up, and interviews that we will be conducting coming up this Monday evening with candidates. Our goal is to have an individual for selection by the City Council at the December 16th meeting. So we'll have a new person on the board coming up next year. And then comes to my last item here, which is to Commissioner Toppin, which is this will be his last meeting. Ron has been, God, I don't know where to start, instrumental in development in the city over the years, 20-plus years that I can count being here, in just so many different capacities. He was served early on their industrial park board, served on our economic development commission, served on the HRA, served on HEDRA, served the city. Ron, as you all know from working with Ron has a great, quiet, steady leadership that he exudes. He is one of the most intelligent, thoughtful, competent people I've ever seen in development. And he's been a great leader for the projects that we've had. When you take a look at what's happened within this city over the last 20 years, so much of that has his stamp on it. And I, as a staff member, want to just extend my appreciation for the steady hand that he has brought to what he has done. Wish him the best in his endeavors, and thank him so much for all that he has done for the city. And thank you, Ron.
Thank you, John. Thank all the other commissioners and all the commissioners in the past who I've worked with. It's every opportunity to work together with this group has been enjoyable. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. And that's all I had.
Thank you. And thanks, Ron. I think if there was a Mount Rushmore of HEDRA, you would be on it. How's that sound?
Exactly. Which one would he be?
Get some bluffs around here. We could start carving it. Real quick, John, I just want to follow up. Have we heard any more on development plans on the Caribou site over there by Walgreens? I
Not
have
in
to
the
respond to my
last,
kids.
not in the last month. About a little over a month ago, we did confirm that the final hiccup on that project, which was the establishment of the easement rights by the, not by the property owner on that one, had been resolved. So we anticipated that plans would be forthcoming very shortly. They have not been. So we'll follow up on that one.
All right. I believe we're in a position to entertain a motion here. A motion
I'll second
and a
it.
second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I should have let you make the motion, sorry.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.